Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God.
We continue this morning in our study of the Gospel of Matthew, the King and His Kingdom. The title of our message this morning is Vision. Last week we walked through the death of John the Baptizer. We saw that Matthew included the information on the death of John the Baptizer to further develop our understanding of the transition of ministry Jesus was going through. Jesus was seeing opposition to his ministry grow within the leadership, but he was seeing his popularity among the people grow at the same time. And Jesus was going through this transition where he had been offering the kingdom to the Jews right then and there to now focusing on the cross. The cross always was his goal, but his ministry at first was to offer the kingdom. And he's now in this transition, Matthew's recording, as he's going from offering the kingdom to now being focused on the cross. And there's a correlation between the cross and the rise of the opposition by the leadership in Israel. As the public gravitated toward Jesus as the Messiah, in whatever way they understood Messiah, the Jewish leadership saw their control of the people slipping away, and so they began to increase their opposition. So let's begin in verse 13. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself, but when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus heard of the death of John the Baptizer, he withdrew from the crowds and wanted to be alone. John was his cousin, his friend. They had more relationship than just the encounter at the baptismal in the Jordan. As you study through the Gospels and you look at the movements of Jesus, it's clear he recognized the need to get alone into a quiet place from time to time. I think that it's important in Jesus' humanity to get away from the noise and to just be quiet with God. I also think it was important for Jesus in his divinity to get away from the noise of the crowds and the people and to commune with the rest of the Trinity. For eternity, he had been part of the triune Godhead without any noise. And then they created, and after the creation there was nothing but noise. And so in his now new role, as we saw in Sunday school, in the hypostatic union of fully God, fully man, he needed both in his divinity and in his humanity to get away from the noise. And so he got in a boat and he went to the other side. I think in his divinity, he's beginning to think about what was coming. You know, as God, he knew what the cross would be like. He knew that in a few months, perhaps a year, he would be on the cross crying out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? As what has been a perfect union for eternity was now fractured because he took on sin. And as he progressed to that point, the weight of that had to be enormous, both in his physical and in his spiritual being. I think that illustrates for us a couple of principles that we should pay attention to ourselves. If Jesus in his humanity and in his divinity needs to take time away from the noise of the world and be alone with God, how much more do we need to do that? How much more do we need to spend quiet time away from all of the distractions. Your physical body, your mind, needs to have downtime to decompress and to rejuvenate, so you can accomplish the good works that God has prepared for you to do. I've really enjoyed a significant portion of this year doing my daily readings out on the patio every morning. I used to do it in my study, where there's all sorts of other distractions. But going out into the patio, just my coffee, that's a must. Coffee pot is strategically placed on the route from the bedroom to the patio door, so I can have coffee. And just me and the text and the birds and whatever's going on in the world. I really have enjoyed that. It's changed how I understand and how I hear God speaking through the text. I think Jesus is demonstrating that for us. Our world is so full of stuff today. You have sensory overload almost all the time. You almost can't get away from it. But our minds, our bodies need that. So figure out a way to do that. Now Jesus goes to another place to be quiet, but that doesn't stop the crowd. So Jesus begins to feed the 5,000. Really, it's more like 10,000. Verse 13 and 14. Now when Jesus heard this, again, the death of John the Baptizer, he drew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Some say they even ran. When you look at the Gospel of Mark, you get the indication not only did they follow on foot, but they ran there to get to the other side where he was going to be so that they could be first in line. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and he had compassion on them and he healed their sick. So Jesus went to a desolate place to be alone. Dr. Luke tells us that he was in the Sea of Galilee near Bethsaida, where he ended up. On the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee. We believe he had been in Capernaum on the northwest shore. So he gets in a boat and he sails around the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. But the people still wanted more from Jesus. So they walked around the shore, or ran around the shore of the lake, and eventually got to where Jesus was out in the boat. Jesus stayed in the boat offshore a little while, communing with the rest of the Trinity. Then he went ashore, and the crowd was already there waiting on him. Mark tells us that the crowd ran to make sure that they were there, that they were first in line to see Jesus. The crowd was a large group of people. We learn later it was 5,000 men, which means it was 10,000 or more people when you add women and children. When Jesus saw the crowd, he had compassion on them. Remember, he went to be quiet, to be alone. And he stopped that and had compassion on the crowd. I see a couple of things about Jesus here. He had not yet had much time to process the death of his cousin. The murder of his cousin, the beheading of his cousin. Death is one thing. Murder takes it to another level. Beheading and presenting a head on a platter takes it to a whole new level. And he hadn't yet had time to process that. Yet he still had compassion on the crowd. He went to get away from the crowd, but he still had compassion on them. It's very important for us to recognize this principle here. His compassion for the crowd outweighs his own needs. His ministry obligations outweighed his own needs. While dealing with the grief of the death of his cousin, Jesus was still more concerned with others rather than himself. What an example he is to us, and shows us how we're to act. So often we place ourselves first. We do for others only out of our spare time. We do for others only out of our abundance. What we give in the offering plate is out of our excess rather than the priority, and everything else is out of the excess. We only do for others when we've been cared for, when we've been pampered ourselves, when we've had the time to decompress. I don't know how many times in doing ordination exams, guys will tell us that their priority is always to take time for themselves and for the family, because if they can't do that, they can't be good to the church. Well, there's a certain amount of truth that you've got to care for your family. Caring for your family is a priority. That's not what Jesus modeled for us. Rather than mourn the loss of his cousin, he had compassion on the crowd, and he went ashore and he healed them. Jesus purposefully went away from the crowd to be alone in what we would call me time. When it was invaded, he then went ashore and ministered. There's a picture of how we're to minister there. Verse 15, now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." I love these verses because I see me in these verses. Every time I read them, I see a great big picture of me. If I was a disciple of Jesus, I would have acted exactly the same way. How you characterize the disciples in how would you characterize the disciples in verse 15? I'm asking a question. I want some answers. How would you characterize the disciples here in this verse? Okay, so they were thinking of him. Okay, that's an interesting take that I hadn't considered. Okay, thinking of themselves. Oh yeah. The title of my message this morning is Vision. They had no vision. This is me, by the way. There they were, standing with the creator, sustainer of the universe, who made everything, who keeps everything together. It's no big deal for him to feed them. Hey, boss, send them away so let them get fed themselves. They didn't even think about a miracle. That was the last thought on their mind. No vision. I see that they don't think big. They don't think about miracles. They don't believe God can or will do anything spectacular. They were primed for a miracle. Jesus had set it all up for a miracle. I often wonder how disappointed Jesus was in the disciples. I mean, he had been out there, he had teed it up perfectly. No place, no McDonald's, no Chick-fil-A, nothing to eat. The creator, sustainer of the universe, who they had seen perform miracles, and they didn't think he would do a miracle. My friends, that's you and me. Certainly me. And I suspect it's a lot of you too. I would have thought after walking with Jesus for any amount of time and seeing him perform miracles, the disciples would have been looking for a miracle here. But they didn't. That's not what the disciples were thinking at all. No thought of a miracle. No thought of something big and spectacular. The only thought was to send the people away to fend for themselves into the surrounding communities. The disciples lacked vision. They lacked real confidence in a God who had created everything and sustains everything. They did not and probably could not see the potential right in front of them. I understand that. I've said frequently, I'm not a visionary. I have confidence in God. I trust God will do what he wants to do. I just can't see it before it happens. I lack the vision to see what he could do. I often feel that's why we've remained small, because my vision has always been small. I lack the vision to take us to a larger place. So when I see the disciples lacking vision, I'm encouraged, because they are me and I am them. I don't see what God could do until God has done it. As I looked at this passage, I also wondered how the disciples coming to Jesus and telling him that the crowd is hungry, that they should send them away to get food from themselves, would make Jesus feel. I have to wonder if Jesus thought, can't they see the potential miracle here? What's the matter with these guys? Why can't they see what could be done? They didn't even ask if there could be a miracle. Jesus, we've got to send them away to get some food. Do you think maybe you could do a miracle? They didn't even ask that. They didn't have any anticipation of a coming miracle. What they saw was hungry people, no food, send them into town to get their own food. They didn't see a miracle. The Apostle Paul tells us, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. Who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. You ever think about what Paul's talking about? God can do way more than we can even dream of him doing. Here the disciples were set with Jesus, primed for a miracle that they couldn't even comprehend of. But that's the difference between God and us. He can do far more than we can even think of. What can Jesus do in your life that you've not imagined or asked for? What can Jesus do in this church that is more than we imagined or asked for? What can Jesus do in our country that is more than we can imagine or asked for? Have you ever thought about those things? If this verse is true, you all should be saying, and it is. If this verse is true, what could Jesus do with this body of believers? What could Jesus do in the United States of America in 2019? Yeah. But do we believe it? I mean, it's more than we can imagine, more than we can ask. But is it something that we actually believe? Look at how Jesus responds to the disciples. And you don't get the inflection of voice in the written text, but I hear Jesus in a kind of disappointed tone here. They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. He's teeing up the miracle again for them. They didn't get it the first time. You guys give them something to eat. So what do you suppose Peter's thinking right now? Hey, boss, there's no food here. We got to send them. Peter, you just give them something to eat. What's Peter thinking? Yeah, exactly. There's no faith again. How am I supposed to do it? What am I supposed to do? I pick on Peter because I think he's a lot like me, open mouth, insert foot. One scholar refers to Peter as the disciple with the foot-shaped mouth. Jesus replies to them, they don't need to go away. You guys feed them. I'm sure that Peter was coming up with all sorts of excuses. He's coming up with all sorts of rationalizations why he couldn't. But isn't that just like us? Jesus says, go out and do this. No, I can't. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the experience. I don't have the training. Rather than, yes, Lord. Imagine how this miracle would have gone differently. if they had gone to Jesus and said, Jesus, could you do a miracle? Well, sure, I'd be glad to do a miracle here. But we wouldn't have gotten a lesson. Very good. Look how the disciples responded. Again, a rationalization. They said to him, we have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. That's all we got. They're in the presence of the creator, sustainer of the universe. All we got is 2 loaves, or is 5 loaves and 2 fish. The idea here is that even if they divided it up, each person would only get a crumb. Do you see any vision here by the disciples? Do you see any thought that the creator, sustainer was right there and could provide them with all the food that they needed? No, they couldn't see the potential miracle right in front of them. Jesus gave them the opportunity to see a miracle. And then he gave them a second opportunity to see the miracle, and they didn't. They missed it, so Jesus had to step in. I often wonder how much it broke Jesus' heart when the disciples didn't recognize the spiritual world right in front of them. When they didn't see these things, when they didn't have vision. Just like I wonder how many times I've disappointed Jesus by not having vision. We often fail to see what's potentially right in front of us. We fail to see what God can do. And he said, bring them here to me. Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. I wonder, as this was happening, as Jesus says, well, give me the lunch and set everybody down. I'm wondering what the disciples were thinking. It's not enough, boss. Everybody's going to get a tiny crumb, and that's it. Nobody's going to get sustained by this. Jesus ordered the crowd to sit down, and I think that's an indication to the disciples that a miracle was coming. But I don't think they got it yet. When Jesus started to give them some instructions on where to sit, how to be grouped, there must have been a sense of excitement, but also of confusion, because I don't think they got it yet. Then Jesus took the bread and the fish, and he looked toward heaven, and he thanked God for them, doing what every good Jewish boy would do, offer thanks for their food. That's so they don't get stomach aches if they eat before they pray, as we know that happens. Right, Catherine? He was also displaying the authority of God the Father in the accomplishment of the coming miracle. Thank you, God, for all this food that they're going to get to eat. Peter's in the back going, what are you talking about? There's 5 little barley loaves and 2 little fish. It's not like they're having a feast here, boss. Then Jesus started to break the loaves and the fish into smaller pieces, and he continued to do that. And then they started passing it out. Now it's starting to dawn on them. Something is happening here. So much so that everybody gets fed. The food kept multiplying. So much so that after everyone was full, there were 12 baskets full of leftovers. I don't know about cocktail sauce and tartar sauce. I don't know if that was included. But since it was a miracle of Jesus, and since he can do way more than I can imagine, I'm thinking he had multiple kinds of cocktail sauce and tartar sauce for them. There was butter for the bread and all that kind of stuff. He gave them a feast from a little lunch. He is able to provide more than we can even ask or think was possible. And they ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Matthew here cleans up some details for us. There were 5,000 men, so when you add women and children, probably more than 10,000 people there. 10,000 plus people who ate from 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. Now, when you think of these loaves, don't think of nice loaves of Wonder Bread that has 36 slices in each one. These are little tiny little barley cakes about this big, right? We would call them biscuits or English muffins, maybe something like that, or little hero pockets or whatever you want to call them, but something like that. So let me put this into perspective for you. When Hertz Arena sets up with seats on the ice for a large concert, according to what I could find on the internet, that's 8,264 seats. Okay? A little bit smaller than what Jesus was dealing with here. I don't know the restaurants there at Hertz, but I'm sure there's a place you can get fish and chips. So go up to that restaurant and get 1 order of fish and chips. Then go down to the floor and start distributing that to everybody so that everybody gets to eat full. Now, that means, when you're talking about little sardine type fish, you're talking about eating a bunch of those to get full. You're talking about little cakes like this, you're talking about a bunch to get full. And so everybody eats from that little fish and chips dinner, and then they collect up what's left over, and it's more than they started with. I know that my wife thinks that actually happens in our kitchen, in our refrigerator. The leftovers grow and multiply and become way more than we ever had in the first place. But that actually happens here. The leftovers were more than they started with. Jesus started tearing the fish apart and putting it in other baskets and just kept doing it until everybody ate. So what do we do with this passage 2,000 years later and thousands of miles removed? There are several ways to apply this passage, but I want you to know that this passage hit me really hard this week. Beginning early in the week when I started working through it, all the way through right now in delivering the message, Jesus has been smacking me upside the head. He's been taking one of those fish and hit me with it. I said earlier that I'm not a visionary. I wouldn't make a good entrepreneur. I can't see what could be or how to get to what could be. I have read and reread and all sorts of books and articles on things to be used by Jesus to build his church. I recognize Jesus builds his church, but I'm one of the tools that he uses. And I'm not a very effective tool often because I don't look into the future and see what he could do. I've been through many training sessions on church growth and church planting. The disciples didn't realize that they were being prepared by Jesus to do a mighty work. They didn't even consider the possibility. The only thing they could see was what they always saw, the normal physical world. They didn't even consider that Jesus could or would do a miracle. I think we're all like that to some extent. I know I am. I spent 30 years looking at evidence to determine or prove what happened. I didn't look to prove something that could be. I can't charge somebody with a potential crime in the future. I have to look backwards and look at the evidence. But God expects us to look at the past and the present and see what he can do in the future. The writer of the book of Hebrews says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen." Our faith is trusting that Jesus will do more than we can ever think or ask. Feeding 10,000 people from a little lunch. That's not too much to ask for. We have faith in God, but do we really have the conviction of something that we can't see? I think that see here is more than just visually seeing. I believe that the author of the book of Hebrews means that more than just what you can see such as what you can see in your mind's eye or dream of. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. We must trust Jesus to do all that he's promised to do. In a few weeks we'll see in Matthew 16, verse 18, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Not Rich, not even Peter. Jesus will build the church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Jesus said he'll build his church. And Satan won't ever win. You know, as I read things especially in the church growth movement, you read things that if we don't do this or we don't do that, the church is going to die. Well, that's just bad theology. The church can't die because Jesus said the gates of hell won't prevail against it. It will continue on. We have to trust Jesus to do what he said he would do, and that is to build his church. We simply need to trust him to do what he said he would do, and then look for the ways that we can participate with that. Look for occasions for Jesus to do miracles. I'm not in the miracle hunting business. I need to be. I need to be in the miracle hunting business. I need to expect Jesus to do more than I can even dream of. And I need to begin to look for those occasions. We should never be like the disciples and tell Jesus just to send people away to feed themselves. We should always see it as an opportunity to see Jesus do a miracle. I'm very proud of Brian for the work that he does in trying to reach people. He doesn't reach people that have money or people that have something, a lot that they can contribute here. The people that he hangs out with at work are all needy people. Just like Jesus was reaching out. Brian's more of a visionary than I am. We should never be like the disciples. It's not convenient for us to do anything with them. Send them away. That should never be on the heart and the mind of a church. We should never send people away. We should be looking for those miracle opportunities. We need to look at what's going on around us and not see the obvious, but see the spiritual. We need to see the situations that are primed by Jesus to do miracles in. When Jesus goes to a place where there's nothing around and a crowd is there, what do you expect is going to happen? He's going to have to do some kind of miracle. I think Jesus planned out the miracle that we read in today's text by going across the lake to a place where they couldn't get any food, where no McDonald's and no deliveries, no Pizza Huts, nothing was around. They had to be cared for by a miracle. He did it to show his disciples how to look past the obvious physical and look at the spiritual potential. We need to do the same thing. We need to do the same thing every day. Look for the spiritual potential in every situation. Why did Jesus place you where he places you? In your neighborhood, in your family, in your workplace, in the store you shop in the place you like to go to have donuts in. Why did Jesus place you there? What's the miracle he wants you to do there or to be a part of there? Why did Jesus give you the friends that he gave you? What kind of spiritual potential is in your life? Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. What are the possibilities of Jesus doing more than we can ever think of? Or more than we can ask for? When you are confronted with a situation, do you dream of what Jesus could do here, or do you think to send the people away to get their own food? I'm afraid we're guilty of sending people away to get their own food. We need to begin to dream and look at every situation as an opportunity to see Jesus do more than we can think, more than we can ask, and then watch Jesus build his church. Father, thank you for the picture in the text today of a group of men that had no vision, and for the picture of Jesus who said, watch this, and taught them to have vision. Lord, we know that after they saw you crucified and then resurrected, they had vision. They began to see the potentials. And they went out in ministry, and the entire world was changed because of those 12 men. Lord, you've called us to do the same thing. You've called us to have vision and think about what you could do through us. Lord, we don't build the church, you do. You use us as tools. Make us good tools, Father. Let us be used of you mightily. Let us see the vision that you have for us. We love you in Jesus' name.
Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.